and Dave had basically co-founded two companies before. One of them sold for 320 million to AOL back in '99, and the other one sold for 65 million to Sony in 2006, I believe. So it was really a great opportunity to get connected with these guys. Basically, started working on a new startup idea with them, doing some market research and looking at different product concepts. When they scrapped that idea, they basically started to do full-time investing through a personal fund of theirs called Freestyle Capital, and they actually had a lot of pretty cool web investments in top companies. To date, they've made investments in companies like FormSpring, GetSatisfaction, CoTweet, Chartbeat, Crowdflower, and a few others. Really, some of the top internet startups. that were uh, that were growing and thriving at the time. And then immediately after college, through Dave and Josh and Freestyle Capital, I got connected with a company called Crowdflower, which was a portfolio company of theirs, and they basically offered labor as a service. So in the same way that Amazon provides cloud computing as a service through EC2, Crowdflower basically offers human labor. So if you have any kind of work that needs outsourcing, instead of hiring a temp, you can go to Crowdflower and basically pay per hour, pay per result that you get for tasks such as business listing verification or image moderation, all these things where a computer can't do with algorithms, but humans are really good at. Yet currently the costs of hiring people and then maintaining a workforce, et cetera, are just too expensive. It's a very illiquid market for labor, and Crowdflower is basically fixing that by creating a spot market for labor. So I worked with them for about 6 months, and learned tons about the Valley. Got connected to a bunch of people through the founder of that company, Lucas Biewald, who was also a great mentor of mine. And basically, I'd been probing around on this idea for eTax for quite a while. Even as long as maybe a couple of years before I moved out to the Valley. So I don't know which slide you guys are on, but I'll move on to a brief history of eTax. Howie, are we on that slide? Cool. So yeah, just to give you a brief history of eTax, we really started in earnest. Even though I'd been kind of thinking about the idea and doing customer development for a couple of years, talking to different people, stakeholders, it really got serious in basically around October, November of 2010. I connected with a Duke classmate of mine, Evan Beard, who we had actually talked about, potentially doing Y Combinator or a startup before during college, but kind of timing had never really worked out. But now I basically got a call from him saying, do you want to do Y Combinator for this batch? And if so, do you have any ideas? And I basically pitched Evan the idea I had for eTax, which was a kind of app that would disrupt the CRM industry by focusing on individuals and SMBs who are radically underserved and overcharged, if not completely unserved by the existing CRM players like Salesforce, et cetera. And Evan, interestingly enough, had actually worked that same summer on a consumer app that had similar kind of background, which was called Girlfriend Keeper, and there was also a Boyfriend Keeper version. And basically, the idea was that you would put in your significant other's name and some other details like their birthday, your anniversary date, maybe their eye color, hair color, and it would basically send automated texts and emails saying, "Hey, Hannah, it's been 4 days since I last saw your green eyes. Like, still thinking about you," and other humorous messages. Which actually, due to the nature of the app, it actually got featured on Good Morning America and in radio stations and some TV in all 50 states. So I thought it was pretty funny. We actually applied to Y Combinator. We kind of built a prototype for that, did the interview, and got accepted. And so in December, actually, I believe 2009. I think I've been saying 2010, but 2009 is correct. So in 2009, we actually incorporated the company through Y Combinator, and then began the program in January of 2010. In February 2010, we launched the first iteration of our product. So we launched on TechCrunch with our first kind of minimum viable product that was ugly around the edges, but but had the basic functionality that we wanted. Launched a few more iterations publicly, got some press around that, and then completed the Y Combinator program in March 2010. At that point, the end of Y Combinator basically has a day called Demo Day, which is where Y Combinator invites all the top angel investors and VCs from across Silicon Valley to come basically watch all the startups from this batch pitch. And so through that, as well as some personal friends of mine from before, we basically raised and closed a seed round in about May 2010. Our angels basically included Ron Conway, Eric Hahn, who's the CTO of Netscape, one of the founders of YouTube, as well as the founder of Delicious, Josh Schachter, the founders of PowerSet, who I knew from before, and a Fuqua alum, Chris Morton, who I believe is in the audience now and is also an entrepreneur of his own. And there were a few others as well. After that, we actually went into kind of full-time hiring mode, knowing that building out a smart team was a core competency that we needed in order to scale. And so we kind of started recruiting and interviewing full-time at that point. I think I personally looked through probably more than 500 resumes, did about 100-ish phone screens, 10 to 15 to 30-minute phone screens, and then we narrowed that basically down to about 10 or so full-time or in-person interviews, maybe 10 to 20. And from that, we hired two incredible employees who were really kind of late-stage co-founders, you might say. One of them, his name was Kaseng. He was from MIT, perfect GPA. He had actually gotten a double E and CS major with both a master's and a bachelor's in 4 years total. And the other, Ilya Sukhar, was a former Googler who had basically then joined a startup called Uyala, which was a fast-growing startup in the Valley. They're now over 100 people, and built really a lot of their hardcore distributed systems, distributed data stores for them. So working with systems like Cassandra, which is this big NoSQL data store that Facebook pioneered. And actually, Kaseng is now working at Quora, doing some pretty cool stuff, rebuilding their infrastructure, and Ilya is actually now the founder of a new startup called Parse.com, which is basically a backend for mobile apps. So kind of like a Heroku for iPhone apps, Android apps, where you don't want to set up your own server, you just want to write a mobile app, and so they give you a plug-and-play solution for that. Next slide. So basically, what was eTax? The overview of eTax was basically, like I said, I spent almost 2 years before we actually started the company kind of thinking about this idea in the back of my mind. It was something that I really needed personally and couldn't really find anything for myself out there, as well as talking to a bunch of people, whether they were in BD or sales or really any of the kind of outbound communicators, anybody who would be on LinkedIn. Just realized there's this massive need for a kind of CRM or a relationship management layer for individuals as well as SMBs, and there really wasn't anything there. While at Crowdflower, we saw the company scale immensely, and it went from 4 people when I joined to it's now 40 people. But during the time that I was there, I can't actually remember exactly how many people were there when I left, but we had just started to scale and get some of our biggest clients, our real Fortune 500 clients, and so we were experimenting with different CRM solutions. I personally played around with a few different CRMs like Salesforce or Highrise, et cetera, and just found that none of them really were what I was looking for in terms of a super lightweight product at the time. So, kind of realized that there was this opportunity to disrupt the CRM industry in kind of the classic innovator's dilemma sense by creating a lightweight product for individuals and SMBs who are drastically underserved and overcharged at this point. So the initial target audience was really, any of these people who would be on LinkedIn, salespeople wanting to manage their own Rolodex outside of work, because if you use Salesforce or Oracle or SAP, that's great while you're at work, but as soon as you leave your company, you don't keep that Rolodex with you. It's your company's property. They own it. They own the contacts in there, and it's their sales pipeline. The same for anybody who does biz dev. Realtors, recruiters, PR. All these people are kind of you can consider them as a one-person business. And also, if you look at the existing social products out there like LinkedIn and Facebook, they don't really solve this need because they're really about giving you a social graph and creating social kind of information. So, creating status updates, showing you, info about these people, but they're not really the workflow tool that CRM is. So the product was basically something that really focused on the parts of CRM that are broken for individuals and SMBs, namely the fact that there's a lot of tedious kind of manual data entry. If you've ever used kind of a traditional enterprise grade CRM, it's obviously a great product if you're in a big company, and it's a necessary product, but it's a lot of work. There is a lot of manual kind of input required whenever you log an activity, like calling somebody or emailing somebody or even creating a contact. All of that kind of takes a lot of work, and sometimes you spend more time actually doing that work than focusing on the part that matters, which is just seeing your relationships and being able to track those. So we tightly integrated with your email, your phones, your phone calls, and your social accounts to basically try to automate as much of this activity logging and data input as much as possible. We would give you one-click reminders to stay in touch with somebody. So you could go through this contact list that we would import from your email, and you could say, I want to talk to this person every 3 months. I want to talk to this person every year. I want to talk to this person every 2 years. And then we would kind of send you an update every week or every day, whatever you wanted, telling you which people had kind of gone overdue. And it wasn't just a dumb reminder that would go out every 2 months regardless. It would actually check to see if you really called them or emailed them. And if so, it wouldn't send you a reminder for that person. So it's truly kind of an intelligent, automated way to keep track of your relationships in the same way that Mint.com monitors your accounts and helps you keep tabs on those. We also offered some lightweight notes and automatic conversation logging. So instead of having to write down every time you email somebody or talk to them on Facebook, et cetera, we'd actually try to import as much of that as possible so that when you clicked on a contact, you could just see all the recent conversations you had over email or phone call, et cetera. So really our competition here was not Salesforce or other traditional CRMs as a direct competitor, but non-consumption, as in the people that we were targeting initially were the people who basically CRM was way too heavyweight for them and they wouldn't use it at all. So we were really kind of creating a new market for CRM. Right now people are using Excel spreadsheets, Outlook contacts, maybe Google contacts, writing notes in there, or maybe even using sticky notes that are on their desk, or haphazard, just trying to remember. So clearly, not an ideal solution right now, and a big opportunity for improvement. We also offered basically, both a web interface, so similar to how you can log into Salesforce.com, as well as contextual integration inside your email client. So inside Gmail or Google Apps, you could actually get this little widget that would show you e-tax info about a contact, such as recent conversations, being able to set a reminder to stay in touch directly from there, and some other things. And we also had future plans for a mobile app and supporting Outlook eventually. Sure. So a little on the technical challenges. I won't delve too much into it, but we did encounter some interesting technical challenges, which I think is actually one of the reasons why there aren't that many people executing well on this particular product and market. So one is I'm a strong believer in this concept that Donald Norman outlines in The Design of Everyday Things, which is actually a classic book on kind of product design if you haven't read it. And he basically talks about how every product has a certain amount of fixed complexity. And what this means is that anything in the world has some amount of complexity, and really what that means is it's kind of the expressive definition of a product. If you look at any app, if you cut away all the repetitive parts, and if it's as expressive as possible, there's some necessary amount of logic that defines the app. Otherwise, if there wasn't any at all, it wouldn't be an app at all. So, take a product like Dropbox, for instance. I think the necessary complexity there is basically, you want files synced between your different computers. You want a single folder where you can drop that into, or where you can drop files in, and you want it to just automatically kind of sync in the background. And when you create a product like that, basically there's obviously a certain amount of complexity to that problem, and you can either have the user deal with that, or you as the designer and the developer can try to go through more work to cut out work for the user. And I think that's something that's strongly embodied by Dropbox as well as a lot of the Mac products. So the idea here is that you can put in a lot more work as a product developer. It's much harder to build a product like Dropbox than it is to build a really simple kind of cloud backend where you just upload files manually. It's not asynchronous, it's not in the background, and it doesn't automatically sync between all your computers. And there's not just a single local folder that just works. But obviously Dropbox is a better product because the designers and the basically the developers back there went through all this extra work to get rid of that complexity for the user. And so we really wanted to do basically the same thing for CRM, where we would go through more work as developers and as product designers to create less complexity and less work for the user. And what that meant was rapidly fetching your existing contacts from your email, so you wouldn't have to create a new contact manually. And that's actually a non-trivial technical problem to solve, because you have to open up, if you have 1,000 users signing up in the same hour, you have to open up all these long-standing connections to fetch in every single email header that they've got from Gmail, which can sometimes be hundreds of thousands per person. You've also got this problem of actually just handing all those billions of rows of data, because as soon as you get more than 1,000 or 10,000 users, you've suddenly got billions of rows of this data to handle. And most database systems aren't really designed to handle billions of rows. They basically crash if you use something off the shelf like MySQL or even Postgres. And so we had to use Cassandra as a scalable NoSQL solution. There were some other kind of tricks that we used to make our product scale. And then finally, there was high volume stats and analytics. So we would do kind of a lot of automated intelligence about figuring out who are the contacts that you need to get in touch with based on you haven't talked to them for a while, or also based on some proprietary algorithms around figuring out how strong your relationship is with them. So we'd figure out basically who your most important people were in your life based on how often you called and when you called and emailed them. We'd also try to categorize people into different groups, like here are people you recently met and want to stay in touch with, here are people you should reach out to, etc. There was also the non-trivial problem of integrating into the actual front end. So putting our UI inside Gmail via browser extensions, bookmarklets, and then also a Google Apps contextual app that basically got sold or got distributed on the Google Apps marketplace. And then finally, we actually had a pretty robust single-page web app that behaved more like a desktop application, similar to what Gmail does over all the predecessors to Gmail, where every time you clicked a page, it would open up a new page, require a full kind of browser refresh. Whereas Gmail feels much more like an app. When you click something, it shows loading, and then it just suddenly shows you the data that you want. So, I'd like to just close out with a brief retrospective, and then kind of open it up for questions, because I think the most interesting conversations will be around kind of what you guys bring up from a question standpoint. But my main kind of thoughts looking back on eTacts, and I think we had a fun ride, and I'm happy with the outcome. We basically we were around for a year and a day, exactly, between founding the company and getting acquired. Having a stellar team of top, really amazing employees who are a pleasure to work with. I think the biggest takeaway is that there's this lean startup method pioneered by this guy called Eric Ries. Book just came out. Definitely worth a read if you haven't already, or at least looking at the slideshare.net version of it. But I strongly believe in the kind of iterative approach that he outlines there. I think iterating quickly basically allows you to figure out when the problem and the solution of a market or of a startup are unknown. Iterating quickly basically means that you can, you're probably not going to know the answer right up front, but the faster you can iterate, the more likely you will be to actually hit the right numbers, hit the right product on its head and get it right. And so part of that means that you also need to be fast at iterating. It's not there's a requirement to be able to iterate quickly, which is that you also need to build and change your product quickly. And I actually think this is why most of the startups out in Silicon Valley are founded by technically competent co-founders, even if they don't end up coding. Once the company is 50 to 100 people, in the early days, the founders are usually, or at least part of the founding team has technical competency as one of their core assets. And the reason for that is that in the early days, it's not just technical competence isn't just kind of a means to an end. It almost is kind of the core competency of a startup, period, because it is what allows you to iterate quickly and understand more about the market and figure out what you need to do. So as an example for us during Y Combinator, we actually would meet with Paul Graham and other stakeholders every week for product advice, and we would literally go back home, work nonstop, and code up actual changes into our web product, and bring it back completely fixed and with the changes suggested or discussed implemented before we visited next, either in a few days or within a week. So without further ado, I'll kind of open it up to questions. Sure. Yeah, so actually just came before us. I think they've been around for at least 6 months, if not a year before. And, I was an early beta user actually of Gist, I think long before eTax started. And actually, I think seeing their product really helped me crystallize what I wanted eTax to be. To be honest, I felt like Gist was a little unfocused in their product. When I used it and when I logged in, I didn't really feel like there was a clear call to action. And they had so many features, whether it was this dossier of being able to see all the info about a contact, or this weird kind of interface where you could drag sliders and manually set the importance of all your contacts. And there wasn't really the clear use case that we wanted eTax to have, which was centered around kind of setting reminders on people. So as soon as you logged into eTax, you would have these big buttons that said, I want to talk to this person weekly, I want to talk to this person monthly, and that was kind of the core way to interact with our service. So I think we wanted to just be a little more focused than them. Sure. So I can't talk too much in depth about the acquisition, but we had basically started talking to a few of the people from Salesforce. Will Moxley, who is the head of products on the CRM product there, a while back, in the early days, and I think that's a pretty common practice for big companies, whether it's Salesforce or Google or Facebook, et cetera, to reach out to kind of the more interesting startups that they see on TechCrunch, et cetera, and just begin conversations, kind of hear about what they're doing, because maybe they want to invest or acquire later. And so, we started talking to them, and then later on, in late 2010, we had a few inbound acquisition offers that were pretty serious and pretty interesting. So at that point, we basically ended up going with Salesforce for an acquisition, and and that's pretty much it. Sure. Yeah, I think Y Combinator is absolutely invaluable. You know, certainly for any first-time entrepreneur, I would highly recommend it. And even for, second-time entrepreneurs, unless, your first company sold for more than 20 million, I think Y Combinator can often be worth it as well. Parse.com is a good example of this where, Ilya, who is the coworker of mine at eTax, joined up with the founder of Scribd, which is this massive, hugely successful document sharing company, and they both ended up doing Y Combinator. And so clearly, I don't think they needed to do Y Combinator, but they did. I see a lot of other kind of successful former entrepreneurs doing YC as well. I think that the main value is, one, Paul Graham's product advice is extremely helpful, especially as just kind of a shock to the face of basically it's an external perspective that is pretty good usually. The second piece of it is really having this rigid timeline that forces you to be faster with your iterations. So, if you're out on your own, you can spend 3 months, 6 months, just kind of moving slowly and adding more features and getting feature crept and not launching. Whereas Y Combinator really does force you to, within this 10 weeks timeline, to launch as early as possible, to iterate, because you have to have something launched before you go into demo day, or else it's much harder to raise a round. And then finally, I think just having the brand name associated with you guarantees you a lot of things like, press becomes much easier to get with the tech blogs through Y Combinator, as well as going to investors. Being branded as a Y Combinator company immediately gives you much more credibility than if not. No, I didn't. Sure. So we actually had a lot of success with just the tech blogs that we got, partially through Y Combinator and then some through, just reaching out to blogs on our own. So we first launched on TechCrunch, and then thereafter got articles from Mashable, Lifehacker, and a few other tech blogs like VentureBeat, etc. And that was actually pretty useful for us because it gave us an initial spike of signups and traffic. But to be honest, that's all we really wanted at the very beginning. We just wanted a larger cohort of users. We started out with friends and family, kind of expanded out to everybody we knew via email and Facebook, and so we had maybe 100, 200 people signed up on the product. And we wanted to just expand that one order of magnitude more, so get maybe 1,000, 10,000 people on the product and using it to just kind of iterate more on the product market fit. As opposed to just pump raw numbers into the user graph. So for us, going with the TechCrunch and Mashable, et cetera, route was really useful in just getting us to that point. We had more than a few thousand signups within the first day actually of launching, and then thereafter, I think we had 10,000 signups pretty quickly. So it gave us a large cohort of users to play with. And then thereafter, we actually, we had a good trickle of users afterwards, as well as, I think it was just kind of organic blogs would write about us. So, we got featured on, a few kind of better known blogs organically, as well as, thousands and thousands of personal blogs, whether it was a realtor, posting on a realtor website, or, we had one guy actually make a YouTube video about how to use our product, and share that with people, and all kind of self-generated publicity. Could you repeat it actually? Sure. So I think overall, knowing a bunch of other startups out here, in the Valley and hearing their story, I definitely would agree that we probably had it easy, or we moved very quickly and had kind of a lot of momentum on our side in general. So I don't think we went through the same level of hardship that some companies you hear about, where they go through 2 years of toiling with no progress, and then finally they have a kind of eureka moment. I think part of that is controllable. Part of that is something that you can kind of engineer the environment to avoid, that period of stagnant frustration. But Y Combinator definitely helped a lot with that. There's a presentation by a guy that I can't remember. I think it's like startups on speed or on, I can't remember the exact name, but it was the guy who founded, I believe, Xfire, as well as a few other startups. And basically it just talks about just this super fast-paced startup cycle where all his companies were basically founded and sold within a year or two, and just the speed with which they scaled and grew was incredible. And I think it really centers on the concept of building momentum as a core way to avoid kind of stagnation. So continuing to have major milestones in the company from for us it was going from launch to this demo day, to raising a round, which was a lot of excitement, gave us more credibility and established us as a legitimate funded company, to hiring two amazing guys to work with, to iterating on the product from there, and then shortly thereafter selling to Salesforce. So there were definitely some challenges at times. I think I think any startup is an emotional roller coaster, and we had moments where launch basically we would basically work 24/7 every time Paul Graham gave us advice on the product, as I mentioned earlier, and that was a very painful period where we were pulling all-nighters and basically working nonstop, sleeping on airbeds. Or Evan and I were sleeping on airbeds at each other's house. And then even after that, we definitely had a few kind of milestones we wanted to hit, like launching, a few new products, launching our Google Apps integration. There was a lot of kind of turmoil and work around that. But I think overall, we avoided a lot of the stagnation and basically pain of many startups. Yeah, that's correct. So I actually can't comment on any of the terms of the deal. Basically, the terms of the deal weren't revealed. But for me, being at Salesforce isn't because of any legal or even necessarily financial reasons, so much as the fact that it's really an invaluable way to learn from this truly cutting edge company in the B2B space, about the B2B industry. And both working at a big company as well as being able to see this macro landscape of all the other B2B companies that we serve, has been truly an amazing experience that, I think when I do found a company sometime in the future, I mean, certainly somewhere down the road, I will do another company, but, I think for now, basically the marginal value of learning that I'm getting from being at Salesforce is worth more than the opportunity cost of not being at a startup. So. Sure. So I think overall with the Y Combinator application, it's becoming more and more competitive just with the number of people that are applying. So part of it, I would say definitely just don't be discouraged if you don't get in this batch. Certainly keep applying in the next batches, but then also consider just going it alone. I think this year they'll probably get somewhere on the order of 4,000, maybe 5,000 applications, and they only take maybe 80 companies or so. So There are definitely some great companies that don't get in, and part of it is just chance at this point because there are just too many good companies to catch them all. But that being said, I think the important pieces of the application are certainly the team and kind of describing what you've done in the past. So really making it clear that you have the competence to iterate very quickly on your product. And doesn't mean that you have to all be hardcore coders from Google or Facebook, et cetera. But it does mean that you have to have product smarts, real experience building web products. If your product is a web one, there have been some hardware startups in the past, so obviously you need domain expertise there. But really, just being able to iterate quickly is one of the core things that they look for. I think your idea matters to the extent that it shows that you're thinking about the space and about startups in general in a very intelligent manner, and that you're learning quickly and learning from the competitors. So understanding what the competitors look like for your space that you're attacking, and understanding what the greater opportunity is super important. I think Y Combinator is increasingly looking for kind of the next Dropbox or the next even Google or Facebook, because a company like Dropbox or Airbnb that's worth $1 billion+ is much more valuable than 100 little companies that sell for 10-20 million dollars. So definitely, I think describing the massive opportunity for your product that you're trying to disrupt is important. And then finally, I think a demo is very key. You don't necessarily have to have one in the actual application itself. If you can show that you guys have done some product work in the past. So if you have an existing portfolio, if you've done something cool at a different company, at a different startup, that's a good substitute for a demo in the application. But if you get an interview from the application, then it's definitely important to build a good demo. Oh, sure. So I think it feels like there's a new incubator every week, and I would say that the vast majority of them, in my opinion, probably don't offer nearly as much value as Y Combinator. I think a lot of the value of Y Combinator and the top incubators is in the brand name and in the fact that it has such a low acceptance rate, as well as uh, their network effects of basically having this massive alum network of founders ranging from Looped, to Dropbox, to Airbnb, to Heroku, and all the investors connected to that, whether it's Sequoia or Excel or whatever. So I think if it's some tiny incubator out in the middle of Omaha that has 5 applicants and takes all five and that kind of thing, it may not be worth it, especially because they're trying to take so much equity, 6 to 7%. Um, I think a lot of the kind of copycats of Y Combinator are seeing how much equity Y Combinator is taking, because it adds so much value, and then trying to replicate that model without actually adding as much value as Y Combinator. So I think if it's one of the top 3 or 4 programs, it's definitely worth doing. Or if it's in a unique, if there's a unique kind of value add. So I think the Duke program that I don't know if it's launched yet or if it's still in the works, but I think there's a lot of unique value there for Duke students to participate in. So I definitely think that would be worth it. Um, but certainly there's too many incubators to even have time to apply to, and I think only the top few are probably worth applying to. So I don't think we share the number officially, but it was in the tens of thousands. Um, sure. Sure. Sure, absolutely. So I was actually Mechie and public policy, but same thing. Uh, I actually, I had kind of a programming background from high school where I had done C++, programming competitions and kind of done it as a, as a fun kind of hobby almost. Um, in college, I basically didn't major in comp sci because I was just more interested in mechanical engineering from an academic perspective, in designing actual, physical things like jet engines, et cetera. But I did have a strong interest in kind of applied computer techniques to designing mechanical engineering things. So, for instance, I did a lot of projects that involved comp sci in Mechie. So, designing airfoils automatically using a genetic algorithm and optimizing, kind of evolving them to an optimum shape to create the most lift or whatever for an airplane wing. But that being said, I do think programming is something that anybody can pick up who has decent quantitative skills. For me, obviously, I didn't major in it, so it's clearly something that you can learn without necessarily being a comp sci major. Although I do think there is an advantage to being a comp sci major. Um, so I think when I look at it, basically, I think my real leap to web programming, which is almost like a different but related field of knowledge to hardcore comp sci around C++ and Java. Um, it was almost like I didn't necessarily want to be a developer for the sake of being a developer. I wanted to be a developer because I knew being a developer is a core competency to founding a web startup in today's day and age. So the way I would look at it is, if you can learn programming, it would almost be insane not to learn it, because especially with modern web programming tools and the frameworks out there, it's really not that hard for anybody who has quantitative skills. Um, and it's such an advantage to creating a web startup. I mean, it's just looking at all the companies that are successful out in Silicon Valley, um, just uh, seeing how many of them were built around having at least a co-founder to being able to build program something. I think the vast majority of them have core tech have programming abilities as one of their core competencies. So I think it's almost a no brainer not to, or it's almost a no brainer to try to learn it if you at all can.